We all know that moment. It happens out of nowhere. You're expressing something important, sharing how you feel, or even just reacting to a situation, and suddenly someone cuts in with 3 words that can instantly make your blood boil. Calm down. There's something in those words that triggers every instinct in you. Maybe you feel dismissed. Maybe you feel judged. Maybe you feel a sudden surge of anger you weren't expecting. And in that moment, you're faced with a choice. Do you react impulsively, or do you respond in a way that actually shifts the conversation in your favor? Today, we're going to unpack that exact moment and give you tools to respond with clarity, confidence, and control without letting anyone take your power. The very first thing you need to understand when someone says, calm down, is that those 3 words are rarely about you. They're rarely a neutral observation. Most of the time, they're a reaction to their own discomfort, their own tension, their own inability to sit with what you're expressing. And if you don't recognize this, if you take it personally, you're already stepping into a trap they've set without even realizing it. It's not about proving yourself. It's not about convincing them that you have every right to feel what you feel. It's about noticing the subtle dynamics at play. Those words are a trigger, but the interesting part is that the trigger isn't pointing at you. It's pointing at them. When someone tells you to calm down, their nervous system is activated. They might feel anxious, impatient, or even afraid of conflict, and their instinct is to try to regain control over the situation by trying to control you. And it's important to see that for what it is. It's not a personal attack. It's a reflection of how they experience discomfort and how they attempt to manage it externally. The moment you recognize this, the game changes entirely. You no longer have to respond with defensiveness, with irritation, or with a desire to justify yourself. You get to step out of the automatic reaction loop and observe the interaction with clarity. You get to notice your own energy, your own heartbeat, your own impulses, and in doing so, you reclaim the space that someone else's words are trying to invade. It's also worth noting that triggers don't always look obvious at first. Sometimes it's subtle, almost imperceptible. Their tone might tighten, their jaw might clench, their words might carry that slight edge that makes your stomach knot. That's your cue to pause, to recognize what's happening, to name it internally before it escalates externally. And in recognizing the trigger, you're not just protecting yourself, you're also gaining insight into the other person. Their calm down is not random. It comes from a place of inner discomfort that they're projecting outward. The challenge and the opportunity is to catch that projection in real time. When you can identify that their words are a reflection of their inner state and not a judgment on you, it changes the entire energy of the conversation. You're no longer reacting to a perceived attack, you're responding to a signal that gives you information about them, about the situation, and about how you can move through it without losing your composure. Recognizing the trigger is like flipping a switch in your nervous system. It shifts your attention from the content of what's being said to the meaning behind it, from the impulse to react to the space to respond, and from a battle over control to a moment of awareness that you can navigate with calm precision, noticing the dynamics at play without being consumed by them. The second step, and it's one that many people completely overlook, is to pause before reacting. When someone says, calm down, your body instantly reacts before your mind even has a chance to catch up. Your heart rate spikes, your chest tightens, your muscles tense, and your first instinct is usually to fire back, to argue, to explain, to prove that you are not upset, or worse, to mirror the aggression you suddenly feel. That instinct feels natural, almost unavoidable, but here's the thing: that split second reaction is almost always the moment you lose control. It's the moment you give the other person power over your energy. But when you pause, even for just a breath or two, you create a different possibility. That pause is like pressing a reset button on the conversation. It's a chance to step out of the autopilot of emotional reaction and into the space of intentional response. It doesn't mean you ignore your feelings or suppress them. It means you allow yourself a moment to recognize what's happening internally and externally before you act on it. And the pause doesn't have to be long. Even a few seconds can make all the difference. Notice your breathing, feel the tension in your body, and remind yourself that you have control over what you do next. This small act of self-regulation immediately changes the dynamic. The person who just told you to calm down suddenly encounters someone who is grounded, who is not reacting to their attempt to provoke, and who is observing the situation with clarity. That alone can shift the energy in the room dramatically. It's also important to realize that pausing is not passive. In fact, it's one of the most powerful forms of communication you have. When you pause, you're sending a silent message that you are present, that you are aware, and that you will respond on your terms, not theirs. And while your mind may scream for immediate defense, for the urge to justify yourself, pausing allows that instinct to settle long enough for you to choose a response that maintains your composure and your authority. The pause gives you a moment to consider your words, your tone, and the direction you want the conversation to go. You might choose to speak softly, to slow down your voice, to ask a question, or to simply acknowledge the statement without letting it dominate your emotional state. In that way, pausing is not just about calming yourself. It's about changing the entire trajectory of the interaction. It's about reclaiming your energy and refusing to let someone else dictate it. That simple. Deliberate pause is what separates a reaction that escalates tension from a response that diffuses it, and it's what allows you to stay in control even when someone else is trying to push your buttons. The third step in handling someone telling you to calm down is to avoid automatic defensiveness. And this one is trickier than most people realize. The moment those words hit, your brain often triggers the same response it always has to perceive threats defense. It's almost instantaneous. You might say, "I'm not upset," or "I'm fine," or even snap back with, "Why would you say that?" These are reflexive responses, automatic reactions that feel justified in the moment because your ego wants to protect itself, because your identity wants to prove that you are in control, rational, reasonable. But here's the reality. Defensiveness doesn't clear your name. It escalates the tension. In fact, it rarely does what you hope it will. When you react defensively, you're essentially confirming, at least in their eyes, that there is something to defend. You're telling them, without meaning to, that their words matter enough to provoke a reaction. And that gives them power over your emotional state. Avoiding defensiveness doesn't mean ignoring your feelings or pretending nothing happened. It doesn't mean being a doormat or letting someone disrespect you. What it means is creating a space where you observe the situation with awareness and choose your response rather than giving in to reflex. It's about recognizing that their words are more about them than about you, and that reacting defensively only feeds the cycle of tension. One of the most effective ways to avoid defensiveness is to simply acknowledge the moment without judgment. You can internally note, "Okay, I feel my chest tighten, I feel my pulse quicken, I feel the instinct to defend rising, but I am not required to act on it." That internal recognition alone diffuses a significant portion of the energy driving your reflexive response. It gives you the mental space to respond intentionally rather than react impulsively. Another strategy is to slow down your communication. Instead of answering immediately, let your words simmer. Even a pause of a few seconds, a breath, a deliberate choice of phrasing can prevent you from saying something you'll regret and stops the escalation before it starts. You can also redirect your focus. Instead of concentrating on disproving them or insisting you're not upset, shift to curiosity. Ask yourself, why might they be uncomfortable? What is this really about? How can I guide this conversation without losing my composure? This subtle mental shift transforms the energy from a defensive confrontation into a thoughtful interaction. The avoidance of automatic defensiveness is a quiet form of power. It signals that you are not controlled by someone else's words or their attempt to manipulate the moment. It allows you to maintain authority over your own emotions and the tone of the interaction, and it creates an environment where understanding rather than conflict becomes possible. The fourth step when someone tells you to calm down is to label your emotion, and this is a tool that is both simple and profoundly effective. Most people, when faced with that phrase, react without realizing that the intensity of their feelings is what gives the situation its power. You feel frustrated, maybe angry, maybe dismissed, and all of that energy swirls inside you seeking an outlet. If you ignore it, it erupts. If you react without thought, it escalates. But when you take the time to name exactly what you are feeling, something remarkable happens. You create distance between yourself and the intensity of the emotion. You step out of the storm and into a space where you have choice. You can say to yourself, even silently, "I feel frustrated right now," or "I feel overwhelmed," or "I feel invalidated." The words themselves are not just descriptive, they are grounding. They anchor you in the truth of your experience and prevent you from being swept away by the automatic response to defend or lash out. Naming your emotion is also a signal to your nervous system that you are aware and that you are in control. The simple act of articulation calms the biological reaction that is triggered when someone tries to push your buttons. Your body starts to recognize that the feeling is real, it is acknowledged, and it does not need to dominate your behavior. This is subtle, but it is powerful. When you label your emotion, you also invite clarity into the interaction. You can communicate your feelings in a way that others understand without escalating tension. For instance, saying, "I feel frustrated because I want to be heard," is not an attack. It is a statement of reality that frames the conversation in terms of your experience rather than in terms of judgment or blame. It also shifts the focus from the other person's command to your own internal experience, which is where the real power resides. Most importantly, labeling your emotion allows you to separate the content of the conversation from your reaction to it. Someone telling you to calm down is not inherently an emergency. Your frustration is not inherently a problem. They are data points, signals that give you information about both the situation and the person speaking, but they do not control your response. And when you clearly name your feelings, you regain authority over how you express yourself, what words you choose, and how the interaction unfolds. You stop being reactive and you start being intentional. Over time, this practice rewires your responses. You become someone who can face the calm down moment without it triggering chaos inside because you have a tool that is both immediate and reliable. The power of naming your own emotion of taking ownership of your internal state, and of speaking from a place of clarity rather than being hijacked by instinct. The fifth step in responding when someone says, "calm down," is to reflect their statement, and this is where many people miss an opportunity to completely change the energy of the interaction. When someone says those words, the natural tendency is to argue, to defend, or to push back. You might feel a surge of irritation, a sense of injustice, or even a desire to point out how unfair it feels. But reflecting the statement is a way to step out of that cycle, to slow down the moment, and to regain a sense of control while still engaging. Reflecting doesn't mean agreeing, and it doesn't mean conceding. It simply means acknowledging what has been said and using it as a tool to create clarity and awareness. You say something like, "I hear that you want me to calm down," or "It seems like my reaction is bothering you." Notice the subtle power shift that happens here. You're no longer in a reactive mode. You're not trying to prove yourself, defend your emotions, or argue your point. You are simply putting words to the observation, naming it in a neutral, almost curious way. That reflection does something remarkable. First, it takes the heat out of the moment because the other person sees that you are not being defensive. Second, it gives them an opportunity to clarify what they mean, which often diffuses tension automatically. Most of the time when people say, calm down, they aren't actually giving you a precise instruction. They're expressing discomfort, impatience, or confusion. By reflecting their statement, you invite them to explain, to step into a conversation that is grounded in understanding rather than conflict. And it's more than just words. The way you reflect the tone, the pacing, the calmness also communicates control. When you repeat or mirror their words without anger or defensiveness, you signal that you are fully present and that their attempt to provoke you does not control your emotional state. It creates a kind of feedback loop where the other person starts to realize that the dynamics they expected are not happening, and that can shift the energy of the entire interaction. Reflecting also gives you a moment to gather your next thought. In that brief pause, you can assess whether to ask a question, clarify your point, or continue expressing your feelings in a measured way. You are no longer trapped in the instant reaction of the human fight or flight response. Instead, you are moving with intention, and that intention communicates confidence, self-awareness, and composure. Over time, mastering the skill of reflecting statements like "calm down" creates a profound change in how you handle tension. You become someone who can engage without escalating, who can listen without losing authority, and who can navigate charged conversations without letting anyone else dictate the tone. Reflection turns a potentially inflammatory moment into a platform for dialogue, understanding, and control, and it gives you the rare ability to maintain your composure even when someone else is trying to push your buttons in the most subtle or overt ways. The sixth step when someone tells you to calm down is to ask a clarifying question, and this is one of the most powerful tools you can use to take control of the conversation while staying grounded. Most people, when confronted with those three words, immediately feel defensive, attacked, or dismissed, and their instinct is to respond with either anger or justification. But what happens when instead of reacting, you slow down, take a breath, and genuinely ask for clarity? Something as simple as, "Can you tell me what specifically feels concerning to you?" Or, "I want to understand why you said that. Can you explain?" changes everything. By asking a question, you shift the focus from an emotional reaction to curiosity, from tension to dialogue. You're no longer responding to a trigger, you're responding to information. And that small shift is monumental because it forces the other person to move from a position of authority or judgment into one of explanation and self-reflection. Most of the time, when people say, "calm down," they haven't actually articulated what they are feeling or why they feel that way. Their words are a shorthand for discomfort, impatience, or a lack of tools to navigate a charged situation. By asking a clarifying question, you give them the opportunity to unpack that shorthand and communicate more clearly, which almost always reduces tension automatically. The beauty of this approach is that it keeps you in the driver's seat. You're not letting someone else define the emotional narrative of the conversation. You're turning their attempt to provoke you into an opportunity for understanding, which is not only disarming, but also incredibly strategic. Additionally, asking a question invites self-awareness in the other person. When they have to articulate why they want you to calm down, they are forced to examine their own reactions and the reasons behind their words. That moment of pause and reflection often leads to a softening of their tone and a shift in energy without you having to argue or prove anything. It also communicates to them, without saying it directly, that you are present, composed, and intentional. You are not reacting impulsively, you are engaging thoughtfully. Asking clarifying questions is also about modeling behavior. You're showing that dialogue is possible even in tense situations, that understanding is more valuable than conflict, and that it is okay to pause, reflect, and respond rather than react. Over time, this becomes a habit that completely rewires how you interact with people who try to provoke you or dismiss your feelings. You move from reactive chaos to calm clarity, and that clarity is contagious. People notice when someone engages with questions instead of defensiveness, and it often encourages them to mirror that same presence and thoughtfulness in return. In other words, by simply asking a clarifying question, you take what could have been an escalating, tense moment and turn it into a space for communication, awareness, and most importantly, control over how you show up in the interaction. The seventh step, when someone tells you to calm down, is to consciously shift the energy, and this is where your presence truly becomes your most powerful tool. Most people, when confronted with those words, feel a sudden spike of tension, almost as if someone has pressed a button inside them. Their mind races, their heart pounds, and their instinct is to match the energy in the room, to argue, to defend, to rise to the bait. But the reality is that responding in the same energy only escalates the situation. Shifting the energy means taking control not of what the other person is saying, but of how the interaction feels, of the emotional rhythm of the conversation. It's about stepping out of the reactive loop and intentionally guiding the tone with your own composure. One of the most effective ways to do this is through your voice. Slow it down, lower it, soften it. The human brain is wired to pick up on tone before content. A calm, steady voice in the midst of tension communicates authority, presence, and control. You're sending a message without having to argue or explain, without having to justify your feelings. Your energy itself is a signal that you are grounded and intentional, and it immediately changes the dynamic. Body language is another key aspect. Stand or sit in a way that is open rather than defensive. Relax your shoulders, unclench your fists, and make gentle eye contact. Small adjustments like these have a profound effect, both on how you feel internally and how the other person perceives you. Shifting energy also means choosing the pace of the interaction. Slow down your words, pause between sentences, and resist the urge to rush your point. Tension often escalates when people speak rapidly, interrupt, or try to force their argument. By controlling pace, you create a space where the conversation can unfold without spiraling into conflict. Another element of shifting energy is emotional framing. Instead of reacting to the frustration or judgment implied in calm down, frame your presence in a way that is grounded, centered, and intentional. For example, you might acknowledge the tension without absorbing it. I notice that this feels intense right now, and I want to continue this conversation thoughtfully. That reframes the interaction from confrontation to collaboration. Shifting the energy is not about manipulating the other person or suppressing your feelings. It's about reclaiming your power over the emotional climate of the moment. It's about taking the energy that could fuel conflict and redirecting it toward clarity, understanding, and calm authority. Over time, mastering the ability to shift energy transforms the way you show up in every conversation, not just moments when someone tells you to calm down. You start to recognize that your emotional presence can influence the tone, the pace, and the outcome of interactions. You begin to see that it's not the words themselves that create tension, but how you respond to them, and when you can consciously shift the energy, you no longer allow someone else's attempt to provoke you to dictate the rhythm of your engagement. It becomes a skill that is both subtle and powerful, one that communicates control, confidence, and awareness without needing to assert dominance or win an argument. The eighth and final step when someone tells you to calm down is to set boundaries if needed, and this is where your sense of self-respect and emotional authority comes fully into play. Many people underestimate the importance of boundaries in these moments, thinking that responding politely or staying silent is enough, but the truth is, without boundaries, the cycle of tension, condescension, and dismissal repeats endlessly. Boundaries are not about controlling the other person, they are about controlling your space, your energy, and the way you allow yourself to be treated. When someone repeatedly or condescendingly tells you to calm down, it's a signal that their words are attempting to override your experience, your feelings, and your authority in the moment. And that's exactly when a boundary becomes necessary. Setting a boundary can be as simple as speaking clearly and calmly, without anger. I want to continue this conversation when we can do so respectfully, or I'm happy to talk about this, but I won't respond when I'm being dismissed. Notice that in both cases, the language is firm yet composed, assertive yet non-aggressive. Boundaries do not require confrontation. They require clarity, presence, and self-respect. They are a declaration of the terms under which you are willing to engage, and when delivered effectively, they often shift the other person's behavior without the need for argument, shame, or defensiveness. Another critical aspect of setting boundaries is consistency. If you allow someone to repeatedly push you beyond your comfort zone without addressing it, you are silently signaling that it's acceptable behavior. But when you consistently set boundaries, you are training not only the other person, but also yourself in how conversations can occur without eroding your energy. Boundaries are also about protecting your emotional state. When you clearly articulate what you will and will not accept in terms of communication, you prevent yourself from being hijacked by someone else's attempts to provoke you. You retain authority over your feelings, your tone, and your response. This is not just about one conversation, it's about creating patterns for all interactions moving forward. The moment you practice setting boundaries, you begin to notice subtle shifts in the dynamics around you. People respond differently when they realize that your energy, your presence, and your respect are not negotiable. You are no longer passively absorbing dismissive or controlling behavior. You are actively curating the space in which dialogue occurs. Setting boundaries also communicates something powerful without having to be confrontational. It signals that you value yourself, that you are aware of your own emotional state, and that you are willing to engage in conversation only when it is balanced, respectful, and productive. It transforms moments of tension from battlegrounds into opportunities for clarity and mutual respect, and it ensures that your energy is preserved even when someone else attempts to undermine it. In essence, boundaries are the final piece of the puzzle. They allow you to navigate the most challenging interactions with authority, self-awareness, and calmness, giving you control over not just the conversation, but also your own emotional landscape, reinforcing the lessons of all the previous steps and creating a foundation where you can show up fully confidently and intentionally. When you look at all of these steps together, recognizing the trigger, pausing before reacting, avoiding automatic defensiveness, labeling your emotions, reflecting their statement, asking clarifying questions, shifting the energy, and setting boundaries, they aren't just tactics for handling a single moment. They are a roadmap for how to show up fully in conversations that challenge you, moments that test your patience, and interactions that could easily pull you off balance if you let them. Each step is about reclaiming control over your own energy, your own emotional state, and your ability to engage with clarity and intention. The real power isn't in proving someone wrong or defending yourself. It's in choosing how you respond and creating space between stimulus and reaction, and in communicating from a place of presence rather than instinct. These steps allow you to transform a potentially charged or uncomfortable moment into an opportunity for understanding, dialogue, and self-respect. They teach you to notice what is happening, not just on the surface of the conversation, but in the undercurrents of emotion, tone, and intention. And when you practice these steps consistently, you start to see a shift, not just in how others respond to you, but in how you respond to yourself. You begin to notice that tension doesn't have to dictate your reactions, that words alone cannot control your state of mind, and that the moments that once left you frustrated or reactive can now become opportunities to demonstrate calm, authority, and awareness. Over time, handling calm down moments this way becomes second nature. It's no longer about strategy or technique. It's about a mindset, a way of moving through the world that prioritizes your presence, your voice, and your energy. It's about showing up in a way that communicates clearly who you are, what you stand for, and how you expect to be treated, all without escalating conflict or sacrificing your own composure. Each of these steps reinforces the others, creating a comprehensive approach that is both practical and empowering, giving you the tools to navigate not just a single interaction, but the patterns of communication in your life with confidence and intentionality.